It's great to see so many people here interested in Robin 747. I'll be talking about Traffic Global and why it's different for Explain than for P3D in particular. Some of the design choices that went into it, certainly, what you can expect it to do, and I also want to talk briefly about what you shouldn't expect it to do. Certainly based on some of the questions that we've been getting on social media and on the floor this morning, they seem to indicate that there are two very different kinds of expectations out there. So we're focused very much on one, really not so much on the other, and I just want to get that sort of clear so that people know what we're talking about. Very, very quick introduction to me. I've been doing flight sim design and development since the 90s on the early versions of flight sim. Mostly for fun, and I've mostly worked on tools rather than the sort of public-facing side of it. They have been used commercially on a few occasions, but now I do it more and more commercially myself. Until a few years ago, my main day job was completely unrelated to flight sims. I was a Unix system administrator, database administrator, which fully allows me to play with what I love doing, which is making complicated things go quickly, which is kind of relevant for this. A few years ago, I worked for Dovetail Games on the ill-fated Flight Sim World. They licensed my mission editor for that, so I did a lot of work on there, a lot of work on the SimConnect API and the mission system, which was never really publicised as much as I felt it ought to have been, certainly. And now, as you said, we found someone mad enough to try and take on doing traffic across the entire planet in real time. So, Traffic Global for Explain, what does it do? Well, it's about talking to the Explain world and filling it full of traffic, as you can see from the screenshot there. We did have a little bit of video, but PowerPoint has tripped me up. So just as a quick aside, if you'd like to see it running, please just drop over to the Just Flight stand. It is running all on the PCs down there. We are not just photoshopping these out, honest. So we are trying to make sure that any airport you visit will have as much traffic as we can shoehorn into it based on real-world airlines, real-world schedules, and it does it in real time, on demand. There's no extensive setup or anything like that. What is it not? We're going to talk about briefly as well, as I said. And I will go into a little depth on how does it work. Not the technicalities as such, but certainly some of the design decisions and why we decided to go down one route rather than the other, which is why, as I was saying, there are two distinct types of product. And I will do some questions later on once everyone's finished. If there's not enough time or you want to ask something especially detailed, then please just drop over to the Just Flight stand on the main floor. So, Explain doesn't really do that much in the way of AI. It's a fantastic simulation system, it's incredibly accurate, but the AI that is there is really a token thing to show that there are some aircraft around. But if you go to a large airport, busy airport, it's just a bit sparse, it's a bit thin. They're not based on real airlines, they are, yeah, I will go back to that. They're not based on particularly real-world airlines, and it just looks a bit thin. So the footnote that I just put up, the star on the top, what we're aiming for is realistic, not real, and that's really the key difference. Realistic being, does the airport look like it probably ought to? Yes. Is it real? Can you check Flight Radar 24 and watch the plane that just landed arriving? No, you can't. And that's design, and I will come back to that shortly. So the AI that we have, and at a busy airport like Heathrow or LAX, there may be several hundred, many hundreds on screen. They're all simulated individually, not nearly in so much detail as a 747, I will admit, but we are simulating 600-700 aircraft at a time in real time, and obviously that doesn't allow for that level of detail. They will follow appropriate routes around airports where they can. They often manage to taxi around each other. Yeah, it's difficult. Well, one of the key things in this is that it works with any airport you have. It's not designed routes, it's not tied to this airport and then an add-on for that airport and an add-on for that airport. It will work with anything, whether it's native X-plane, commercial, freeware, anything you like. That means that it has no idea what it's going to come across until it actually gets there. And that makes that a little more tricky. As they are taxiing around, they will always give you, the pilot, priority, basically because it's kind of rude, and also because you're a completely unpredictable human, that they have no idea what you're going to do next. So if one of the AI aircraft sees you coming out, moving onto a taxiway, less so on approach, they will do their best to get out of your way. And we do have optional collision detection. Very optional. Now, the next thing that we're likely to be asked about, and I'm going to anticipate one of the questions here, is that this is going to slow things down, surely. Like, well, it does, to some extent, but not nearly so much as you might be expecting. As I said at the start, my background is all in sort of high performance, parallel processing, that kind of stuff. And this is all done extremely multi-threaded. So if there's anyone in the room who has a single core processor, I'm afraid you're out of luck. But for everyone else, this will make full use of whatever processing abilities you have. The X-plane frame rate at a busy airport with 200 plus aircraft on screen, yes, you'll notice a drop. I think that's kind of fair. But it's not nearly so much a bigger drop as you would expect from having 200 visible aircraft. This is obviously something that we've been very aware of all the way through development, all the way through the sort of pre-announcement stuff on social media. Certainly the beta team leapt on this straight away. And about the one thing the beta team haven't complained about is the performance. So I'm hopeful. We also have full 3D sound. They're not just static aircraft, so you will get the engine noises, obviously. Those are taken directly, as are all the models, from the P3D, the prepared version of Traffic Global, and yes, they are running inside X-plane. I have read very positive things about the sound in the P3D version, so all those sounds are taken across here verbatim, and as a nice bonus for the X-plane users, we have additional sounds, so things that P3D doesn't allow for, mechanical noises, tyre screech, that kind of stuff. All of that is ambient, so you can follow one of these aircraft down onto the runway. You'll hear the flaps coming up, you'll hear the thrust reversers, you'll hear the tyre screech, all of that. It sounds like a small detail, but the first time I switched that on after it was written, it made such a big difference being able to follow an aircraft in, listen to it get to the stand, the engines spool down. It's surprisingly immersive for something that I thought would be required, certainly, but not that big a deal. It's a bigger deal than I thought it would be. So, numbers, what do we have? Is that going to move on? Are we doing anything? Yes, there we go. So, the traffic database as it stands, and it is using a static database, is serving more than 3,000 airports, 600,000 plus flights in the database, and 800 plus active liveries. The pluses are on there because at the moment it is still changing, it's ticking up as I find small problems with aircraft naming and things like that. But that should certainly be enough to keep most people going. As a very occasional GA pilot myself, the last thing I want to see is more traffic in the air, but apparently that's what the airline crew want. So that's what we've got, and it's actually been a surprisingly large part of the development. That I did a dev diary, which is on the Traffic Global website for a while, and I had an entire month's entry muttering darkly about processing the traffic database. It is alarmingly complicated, and I will spare you the details. If you'd like to know more, check the dev diary or come ask me on the stand, and I will rant about it for the rest of the afternoon, I promise. What else do we have? Yeah. X-plane 11 airports. Any X-plane 11 airport, whether it's X-plane, Plan and Research, third party, freeware, whether it's come from the scenery gateway, it will be used. This is why some of the taxiing is A, complicated, and B, they will occasionally get themselves into places that they're not supposed to be. And this is actually one of the reasons why it's going to be out in a couple of weeks rather than out now, is because there were further problems pointed out to me just last week, and I simply haven't had time to fix them yet. It's a small problem, it should be fairly straightforward to fix, but when you're taxiing around an airport and you see two airliners head to head, it is incredibly visible. So we really, really want to fix that, or at least improve it to the point where it's acceptable. As I said, realistically, we can't design the world's airports. I've said 3,000 plus airports there simply because that's where the traffic database that we have uses. If we had a different traffic database which flew to a lot more of the smaller airports, it would be using 11,000, 22,000 plus airports. If it's in X-plane, it can in theory be used. And the database format that we're using, you might recognize if you've hopped the fence from FSX or P3D, we're using BGLs. I just love the idea of feeding a BGL into X-plane. That tickled me when I came up with that. There was a very good reason for doing that, which was to try and minimize the development time. There is already, on release or very close to release, Traffic Global for P3D, and the idea was to share as many resources as possible. Why reinvent the wheel? That's why we're using P3D models. That was originally why we were using the P3D BGL and front-end tools. That didn't turn out in the end. I suspect the X-plane pilots are rather more discerning than some of the P3D pilots, let's say, because the grief I got over the traffic database was absolutely unbelievable, and there has been a lot of thought and head scratching put into processing that. It should now be as busy as it can possibly be at any given airport. And in fact, there's so many flights in there that the simulators airports simply can't take them all, and you'll only see a fraction of what's actually available. But they are real-world flights. They are about 3 weeks out of date at the moment. So that, as I said, is hopefully enough to keep most people going. We also, I'll skip ahead, additional liveries. Yes, they can be repainted. They are standard X-plane models. Because they're converted, you can't just drop in something that you've downloaded from one of the websites, because there are custom animation controls in there. But they are standard XP11 models. You can repaint them if you like. You can add to them if you like, if you add your own schedules. And you can add your own schedules because it's BGL format. The tools are online. They're not supplied, unfortunately. That was part of the plan, but again, hasn't happened. But there are tools out there to edit and create your own BGLs should you wish to create your own schedules. So, as I said, I need to talk about what it doesn't do, because there are a few key things, and even out on the floor this morning, I've been asked the same questions time and time again. So, let's try and head those off now. It is not a real-world traffic monitor. It's one of the things that's come up so often. It's like, so can I go to flight radar and see that plane landing? No, sorry, you can't. There are several reasons for that. There are also certain limitations on accuracy. It is certainly not as detailed as the 747. The difference there is that is one aircraft that has taken a year plus to develop, I'm guessing. Yeah, that's a labour of love. We have 800 plus aircraft, not that many aircraft types, but there are 800 plus aircraft, 800 plus liveries. There just isn't time to put that much detail into them. The other thing there is that they are deliberately fairly low detail, because once you go from having one aircraft that you're flying to having potentially 200 plus on screen, if you've modelled it down to the rivet level, you know, you're going to be talking about seconds per frame, not frames per second. So they are quite consciously kept fairly simple. But as you can see from that screenshot, and that's from several months ago actually, they look decent. they're okay. They are the models from the P3D version. They are commercially, professionally designed models, but they won't be quite down to that level of detail. One of the questions we asked, and I'm well aware that the person who asked it may be in the room, this was on social media a few weeks ago. Someone nicely and helpfully pointed out that the colour of the taxiing light on a particular model of aircraft from a particular airline was wrong. It was too red, it should be blue, because that airline had updated those aircraft to use LED lighting rather than incandescent. You know, well, that's great. Yeah, that person has put in huge amounts of time and effort to learn that level of detail. But we've got nearly 1,000 of the things. You know, it can't get that detailed. What we're really aiming for is to make the airports feel realistic. And it's back to the phrase that I had highlighted earlier. It's to feel realistic, not to replicate what's happening in the real world, in a real airport, in real time. And because this is focused on airports, if you are planning on flying along with an aircraft as it travels from London to New York, it's a fairly simple route that they're doing. The key there is that there's only so much your PC is able to handle at a time. And it's really at the airports that we're aiming at. It's at the airports that all of the intricate stuff happens. That's where the life is. If you're watching an airliner at 42,000 feet mid-Atlantic, yeah, so they will fly very simplified routes compared to real-world aircraft, but again, there's a limit on the amount of detail that can go in there without it really beginning to slow things down. The behaviour around airports, as I've suggested a couple of times, will be different. One of the beta testers, bless him, keeps on coming back to me and saying, but I know that airport, and they don't taxi down that taxiway, they use the next one along. That's great, you know, you know that airport. I applaud your level of detail and thank you for reporting it to me. Yeah, having someone telling me that level of detail is wonderful. But on the other hand, it's one bit of code. It's one horrifically complicated bit of code, which is trying to handle, I think, 70 plus aircraft types across potentially an infinite number of airports, with an infinite number of taxi routes, with other aircraft moving, with the PC pilot moving in and about the middle. It's going to behave differently. The key thing, though, is that it will use whatever definitions X-Plane provides. There's no additional setup there. So as long as X-Plane has the airport defined correctly, then it will use a plausible route, but not necessarily the one that's in use at that airport, not necessarily the one that a human being might come up with. Because a human being is, one, more intelligent than a computer, and two, much more creative than a computer, and three, most airports, if not all airports, are going to have teams of people studying the schedules, how aircraft move around, all this kind of stuff for days or weeks before they come up with a taxi route. This is doing it on the fly. So it's aiming at plausibility, not real-world accuracy. And the last thing is, yeah, realistic. The schedules, as I've said a few times, you cannot look these schedules up on Flight Radar 24. If you do it right now, there's actually a strong chance that they will match. But we are using a database there, not a real-time traffic feed. And there is a number of reasons for that, which I'll come on to just now. So, how does it work? And this is going to be a very high-level overview. It is horrifically complicated inside. Really, it is horrifically complicated. I'm not going to be going into that much depth right here. If you are interested, then check the dev diaries that I did while it was being developed, or come and talk to me on the stand this afternoon. I will be there, and I'm more than happy to answer any in-depth questions that you have. So the airport data comes directly from X-Plane, the apt.dat file, if you're used to handling those. Basically, any X-Plane airport will have that file. It contains all of the information that you need about parking, taxi routes, runway flow rules, all that kind of stuff is already in there in X-Plane. So there's no need to go about redefining all this, it's already there. The second reason for doing it like that is that we want these aircraft to follow the world that they're in. They're in a simulated world. That world is not the real world, it's different. The aircraft layout's different. The airport, rather, layout is different. Parking allocations are different. The taxi routes are different. Everything is different. So by using a database and allowing them to react to what the simulator provides, what we get is aircraft that follow the world that they're in. If you're putting in real-world traffic in there, real-world traffic is always going to be doing something slightly different than the simulated world expects. So all the stuff that you need is provided by X-Plane. That means also that any other plugins which are interacting with the world in any way are most likely going to be reading the same data. So even without any direct integration between the systems, between the various plugins or gauges or whatever it is, there's a better chance that it will begin to mesh at least. That this was all designed from the start, heavily around the performance aim. So lots of multi-threading, lots of efficient data structures, efficient coding, which I know I'm not going to talk about. One of the key aims that we had was to make it simple and fast. Not just keeping the frame rates up in the simulator, which obviously is important, but to make it accessible to people. So when you start the sim, you start your flight, it loads all the scenery around you, you're then in the airport. At that point, you have traffic. There's no delay, there's no pre-building routes, there's no filing flight plans or telling it where you're going or anything like that. You load an airport, you have traffic around you the second you're there. That is also done with a fairly minimal memory overhead, so if anyone is right on the limit of what their PC is able to do, this is about 500 meg additional memory use. So it's some, certainly, but with that, that allows you to go to any airport you like, and it will just load as you're ready to use it. So everything is just picked up automatically, it's ready to run. It is very heavily multi-threaded, as I've said. There should be very few delays in getting things going, and this is why the frame rates are not nearly so badly affected as you might expect for having that amount of aircraft there. It's doing everything on another core, it's not delaying the main drawing loop inside X-Plane nearly so much as you might expect. That bit is basically just saying, put that plane there, put that plane there, put that plane there, done. There's no heavy lifting done in that at all. So it does have a little impact, but as I've said, with potentially 200 plus aircraft on screen, that's a lot of extra stuff for X-Plane to draw, and as long as you've done what everyone seems to do and switched off shadows and reflections, then you will find that the frame rate is minimally affected. Okay, moving swiftly on then. Yeah, the last thing I want to touch on is why we are using the static database rather than online streaming. I found that there were problems with online streaming, and that was the reason that it was very much a database-based product. You need an always-on network connection, which is theoretically fine, but I use home plugs, and with 5 seconds out occasionally on the home plugs, similar dropouts on the broadband, you suddenly got aircraft stopping for 10 seconds, and if you go offline, then you're out. You're also dependent on an external third party for data, so if your supplier stops supplying, then you're out, you've got no traffic at all, ever. And the biggest one for me was that you can only ever fly right now. If you want to fly tomorrow morning, well, you're not going to get tomorrow morning's traffic. You're going to get the traffic right now. The other big thing with those is that they're never going to avoid you. They're never going to stop and give way to you. They're never going to react to you So you're moving around the airport. You're playing Frogger, not a flight sim. Yeah, it does appear as though we're running short of time, so I'm going to skip some of the other detail. We do have hundreds of planes. That's why it's static database. Yes, you can customize it. You can add your own BGL routes. You can add your own liveries if that's what you choose to do. Third-party support, very briefly touch on. X-Plane only provides information about the first 20 aircraft. If you are a developer and you're interested in communicating with it, like provide additional data refs, we have sample code that comes with it, so hopefully things like IR2ATC and other ATC systems will be able to integrate, but that's out with our control, but that is there, and I'm very willing to talk to anyone this afternoon who would like more information about that. So we've covered what it is, covered what it doesn't, and we've gone into a very, very high-level overview of how it's working. And I will hand over now for final questions.
Yeah, if we've got, if anyone's got any questions either for Jim or Robin, feel free. Anybody? I think we're all stunned. Excellent. Right, thanks very much everybody. Thanks guys.